Hi. Do you want to read
Hey,
or do you want to just
yeah,
talk?
I can read, but I'd rather
Okay, you
just
should
talk.
read. You
Oh, I
should.
should read? Okay, so I'll do that then.
Okay.
Uh, I'm gonna read a little bit from the beginning, and because it's the beginning, you don't need to know a damn thing. It's just the book is called Memorial, and then it starts, yeah? Mike's taking off for Osaka, but his mother's flying into Houston. Just for a few weeks, he says. Or maybe a couple of months, he says, but I need to go. The first thing I think is, fuck. The second's that we don't have the money for this. Then it occurs to me that we don't have any savings at all. But Mike's always been good about finances, always cool about separating his checks. It's something I'd always taken for granted about him. Now he's saying that he wants to find his father. The man's gotten sick. Mike wants to catch him before he goes. And I'm on the sofa, half listening, half charging my phone. You haven't seen your mom in years, I say. She's coming for you. I've never even met her. I say, you don't even fucking like your dad. True, says Mike, but I already bought the ticket. And Ma will be here when I get back, says Mike. You're great company. She'll live. He's cracking eggs by the stove, slipping yolks into a pair of pans, and after they've settled, he salts them, drizzling mayonnaise with a few sprigs of oregano. I don't ask where Mike will stay in Japan. I don't ask who he'll stay with. I don't ask where his mother will sleep here in our one-bedroom apartment or exactly what that arrangement will look like. The thing about a moving train is that sometimes you can catch it. Some of the kids I work with, that's how their families make it into this country. If you fall, you're dead. If you're too slow, you're dead. But if you get a running start, it's never entirely gone. So I don't flip the coffee table or one of our chairs. I don't key his car or ram it straight through the living room. After the black eye, we stopped putting our hands on each other because we both figured silently it was the least we could do. So today, what I do is smile. I thank Mike for letting me know. I ask him when he's leaving, and I know that's my mistake. I'm already reaching to toss my charger at him before he says it. Tomorrow. We've been fine. Thank you for asking.
So, I mean, you don't need to hear this from me, but the book is so good, like from the jump. And I mean, I'm not the smartest person, but I do have opinions. I do have good opinions. So people, trust me, it's very good. And okay, I'm going to start with something stupid because all my questions have to be dumb. I imagine you're being interviewed by like smart people and they're like, so let's talk about the nuance of the blah, blah, blah. Not me.
I have been so
I
looking forward
want
to
to
this though.
start by asking, first of all, this is a two-parter. One, after listening to your bio, what does it feel like to have all of those awards? You know, like when people introduce me, they're like, you know, she has a toilet blog and you know, makes like diaper jokes. And then your introduction is like, you won this award, this award, this award, this award, this award. If I had won that many awards, you couldn't tell me shit. So what does it feel like to be awarded?
I'm still stuck inside like the rest of the world, so it
Yeah.
doesn't really feel like much of anything. No, but really, oh, that's like nice and it's like cute, but mostly like as far as like awards are concerned, that's usually like a product of like the team that you're working with, like that's like Laura Perciasepi and Ashley Garland and Raven Ross and Danielle Bukowski and for a time Min Jung Kim, and so that's my name should be like at the end of it after several asterisks of the very fine print at the bottom of the page where those are listed. But it's been cool to have folks be as, I suppose, excited about Memorial specifically and story generally as it seems that they've been because, you're taking time with a story and time is like such a commodity, like especially now, like there's a fucking like election next week, like rent is due next week.
Uh-huh.
Like so many things are happening. So to be able to, spend time with the story at all is a gift.
You see, that's such a like nice and diplomatic answer, because I would like print every award on a t-shirt and just like wear it all the
Oh,
time and be like, I know you want to know what my order is, but have you seen all the the awards I've won, waiter? Congratulations on Good Morning America. What did it feel like to have your book on a billboard in the middle of New York?
well, it was on a billboard in the middle of the barren streets of New York, but I was at home on my phone.
Mhm.
So I've seen all of this from my phone, and it's all felt really lovely, but I'm watching it from my phone. So, so
Wait, but
I
you
don't
were
know.
on, so you went on Good Morning America on your phone. That's incredible.
The Good Morning America staff beamed me into their office from the screen from a pre-recorded video that I made on my phone. So it is
How did you
objectively
decide what to wear?
strange. How did I've, since March or so, I really don't have a semblance of like what my style is anymore
Mhm.
or what I
Yeah.
like. Like I like to wear comfortable
Me
things at this point, right? Like I dress like I'm on like a mid-tier university's lacrosse team at this point. Just these big fucking shirts and like a
too.
backwards cap and like running shorts. So it was fairly easy to decide because that's all that I have right now.
I would have had like a full existential meltdown about not having good enough clothes, because truly I am a sweatshirt person, and I would be like, I don't own any GMA appropriate
Oh no,
attire.
it's quite all right.
I
Like
love that
I'm
you
I'm the
felt
same.
confident enough to just be yourself.
No, I'm the same. Like I'm myself is Target in a lot of ways. I've gone to like really like nice or like quote unquote like nice functions, and people have been like really thoughtful and kind about like what I'm wearing, and they say, "Oh, where do you get it?" And I want to say Target, but I also don't want to say Target because I don't want them to feel as if though their eye is broken. So I don't say anything. I just let them assume.
Imagine how bad they would feel if, you were like Target and they were like, oh, I can't believe I just complimented his Target outfit. Um, okay, so I have some things about the book. The first thing, like stylistically, I appreciate that like there are so many like short chapters, because it makes the book feel propulsive in a way. I read a lot of thrillers, and so I like a snappy, let's get to the next thing of it all. And I love that like there are some chapters that are just a paragraph. Why did you decide to write it that way? Or is that how it came to you, or was that a choice?
It was a choice in a lot of ways, right? Like, so Memorial is sort of essentially like a love story between these two cis dudes living in Houston, and they're both queer, and they're trying to figure out what it means to be okay with one another, but also what it means to be okay as just a person within a context in which you've been told to be a certain way.
Mhm.
And there's a reading of it where Benson, one of the leads, is someone who becomes someone who can speak up for himself. And Mike, the other lead, is someone who ultimately learns to listen to other people. So trying to figure out how to make that work on the page, a lot of it was structurally the length and the structure of the sentences of themselves change over the course of the text. And that in the first section, when Benson is introduced and he's talking, we're figuring out what his world looks like. There are these very staccato sentences, and some of the chapters are only a line or two, maybe they're like one or two graphs. But by the end of his narrative, he's speaking longer, and we're spending more time with him on the page, and there's more dialogue from him. Whereas for Mike, when we see him from his vantage point, we immediately get a quite long sentence. It's probably too long now that I've had the chance to read over it. But those sentences decrease gradually over the course of his arc as he becomes more suppose, like emotionally intelligent and listens to the folks and the needs of those around him, even though it takes him quite a while. So trying to figure out how to have those personal arcs change in line with the structure of the book was definitely a choice, but it was pretty tricky to try and make work.
It works. It works for me. At the perspective shift, I was like pleasantly surprised at how different they sound. And not very many people can do it and do it well, where they write from the perspective of two different people and they both sound like completely different people. So that's incredible that you did that. How do you like embody two different people? Like, how do you make them feel like two different people?
I think that the drafting process itself had a lot to do with that, you know? So if the conceit of the book is that it's in three parts, I wrote the first part, or the first chronological part, and I immediately started the second part. Then I went back and edited the first in tandem with the second, and immediately started the third part. Then I went back and edited the first in tandem with the second in tandem with the third. And that sort of leapfrogging revolution would have constituted one edit for me. And the book went through about 11 of those, about 7, just me, myself doing that, 2 more, my agent and I working back and forth, and then 2 more with my editor and I. So at about the 9th draft point, about the 10th draft point, I transitioned from editing in that sort of leapfrogging order to editing each of those perspectives autonomously, you know, because they were part of the same story, and a lot of those initial drafts and edits were a part of making that a cohesive story. But now that it felt like those connections fit, I could focus on honing each speaker's respective speech tics and each speaker's respective, I suppose, language preferences and each speaker's respective rhythms, so to speak. And it was easier once the sort of framework had already been established. But a lot of it was just editing and also reading the draft out loud. That was how I caught a lot of, you know, tendencies that Mike may have had that Ben doesn't, and vice versa.
Is it bad that I liked Mike more than Ben? Am I gonna lose my NAACP card?
They might snatch it from you, but I won't. You should stick with me.
Because like it's funny because it's disconcerting because there's so many things I love about Ben. I love his relationship with Lydia, like they're back and forth. I have a bunch of notes that I wrote, and one of them is about how the sibling relationship is so fascinating to me, and the way that they talk to each other is so like real to me. A lot of times, like, you read stuff and sometimes people will be talking to each other and I'm just like, this doesn't sound like two people who know each other speaking to each other. And you have a beautiful way of everything like just sounding like natural and real. But yeah, when I was reading Ben's, I was like, okay, I know, I hate Mike, okay. And then like it was Mike's turn and I was like, this is bad because I really like him. So, and then I was like, oh, I don't know, Jesse Jackson's gonna come like snatch me in the night.
They're gonna get
or
you.
Something.
They're gonna get you.
So I wanted to know, because I'm lazy as a writer, which is why I only write about myself, so I don't have to do any research. How much did you already know? So like part of the book takes place in Japan. And were you already familiar with Japanese culture? Did you have to learn and study and research? Like, what was that process like, and why a Japanese co-lead, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, so for the latter part of that question, like I'm really interested in like this idea of like home, right? And the way in which home can look radically different for different characters and different people. and how that idea for those same characters and people can change over time. And if I were to have seen Mike, on the streets of Houston in the third ward, which is where he lives, and Mike is a queer Japanese American guy who cooks at a Tex-Mex restaurant, living in the third ward, which is one of the country's oldest historically Black neighborhoods, and thinks of himself as a product of that neighborhood and as someone who is contributing to that neighborhood and is contributing to that neighborhood and is in a litany of friendships with the folks who are within that neighborhood. Like if I saw that person just on the streets, like I wouldn't even blink, because that's just how the city is. But it's still, objectively interesting that that is the case. So trying to play with this idea of how someone defines a home for themselves, particularly when that idea of home that they define for themselves might not be explicitly recognizable by other folks, is super interesting to me in any number of contexts. And it felt like Mike was a great way to sort of examine that and to sort of like problematize it. Whereas for Benson, he's a young queer Black cis guy who, one of the closest iterations of family that he's privy to is from Mike's mother, who is this older Japanese woman. And that, again, in Houston would not really be remarkable at all, but just given the city's diversity, just given the sort of ways that the community comes together. But again, like it's objectively interesting enough that you can put it on the back of the book and people might decide to, read it just based off of that. So really trying to play with this idea of like home and family was super important to me. But as far as Osaka was concerned, like I've been really fortunate in that I've gotten to spend a little bit of time there. Like for the past 5 years or so, I've been able to fly out once or twice a year just to visit friends, because if you're flying out from Houston and you don't mind leaving at like 2:43 a.m. with like a 96-hour layover in Taipei, then you can get quite a cheap ticket, or you could get quite a cheap ticket. So I would just go out to visit friends, and I really wasn't looking to write about it or like monetize it or do anything like that. I was just hanging out. But there's such a warmth and a generosity that I was privy to and really privileged to have gotten to experience from friends and like strangers who've since become friends, and just strangers, that it really made an impression on me. And largely because like I hadn't experienced that sort of warmth in any other city that I'd spent a decent amount of time in other than Houston. So the fact that Houston and Osaka in a lot of ways are very different from one another stood out, but also there was that sort of liminal connection between the two, the sort of warmth and generosity of the residents, and also of the sort of geographic points themselves. So really trying to figure out how to put that warmth and that generosity that I got to experience on the page, and seeing how it shifted for each of the characters in different contexts, even if it didn't necessarily go away, was really interesting. And it seemed interesting enough to me that I might stick with it for, how long it took to write the book.
Yeah, you can feel it. The family dynamics in general are super interesting to me, and I appreciated all of the different kind of layers of both Benson and Mike's families that we get into. I especially appreciate that it's a story about different types of love. And that, because like oftentimes you read stories that are about either romantic love or familial love, and it was nice to sort of see the different, like the different layers in one book. That sounded dumb, but hopefully people know what
That sounded great.
I should have put that together better. But it truly like feels real, and like I'm so fascinated by the relationship between Benson and Mike's mother, and like you can feel, I mean, this is just me giving you praise, you can feel how awkward it is, and then how it starts to shift, and how they sort of like you know, kind of find their way around each other and start to like come together. So you did an incredible job with that. And I just wanted to ask, is writing about families, because I've read both of your books, is writing about families a thing you really like to do, or is it something you feel like you have to do? Are you writing about it because you hate your own family and you're taking things out on them? I'm always like curious about why novelists choose what they choose to write about.
Yeah, my family's quite all right. I think that I'm really interested in this idea of like found family and
Mhm.
also the sort of found communities that we construe for ourselves, right? And particularly when that found family and those found communities are seemingly disparate from one another, or they would appear like if you told someone that like, okay, like these are the folks that sort of constitute my revolutions in life, there might be like a question mark over their heads, you know, like when that's the case, I feel like that's like there's an interesting story there, partly maybe because like so much of what I am interested in is set in or around or like a stone's throw from Houston, where that is just the case and it's just understood for so many folks that live here. And partly because I think that it's an interesting way to sort of explore comfort and how comfort can be provided, and also pleasure and how pleasure can be provided, and how that transaction can sort of take place. And when I'm writing about relationships, whether they are platonic, whether they're platonic and sexual, whether they are romantic, whether they're familial, really trying to figure out what each character's love language is, so to speak, right? Like what they conceive of as being love, and whether that conception that they have is actually the truth of it for them, right? Or maybe they haven't quite gotten around to seeing what it is for them. And for Mitsuko, who's Mike's mom, in a lot of ways, I knew like from the outset of writing the book that she would be the moral center and the emotional center of the text in a lot of ways, because even though it is a love story between Ben and Mike, we really don't spend too much time with them on the page at the same place at the same time. But we do spend a good deal of time with Mitsuko, and we do spend a good deal of time with her, with Ben just by herself, and also with Mike just by himself, and also in tandem with the two of them. So in a lot of ways, the reader's understanding of who they are individually and also who they are just as a pair is through her, and she's the one who guides them along in a lot of ways, even if they wouldn't necessarily be able to articulate it as such. So really trying to figure out what each character needs and wants, and whether or not they know that they need and want that, and what it would take to get them at that point was really important to me. Because like if I know that, then I can establish like a sort of shorthand between characters, you know, like if I know what Ben and Lydia want or expect for one another, then I don't need to give like hella exposition as far as saying they've had this experience and this experience and this experience, and that's why they are the way that they are. You know, I can just begin the narrative from a given point, and the reader can use the context from that dialogue and also the context of the situations in which the characters find themselves in to put a picture of them together, right? Like if we only see Ben and Lydia just sort of like hanging out or decompressing with one another, then that is like a particular kind of relationship that they have. And if we only see Mike and Lydia, when we do see them, they're just like super cool with one another and very comfortable with one another. That's also a very particular kind of relationship, just by way of like the context that I put them in, even if it isn't explicitly like what they're actually saying. So really playing with that idea of seeing and what is like said by a character, and also like what is actually understood after that thing is said, was fun to play with when it came to figuring out what the dynamics looked like.
That's such a good answer. Okay, I'm gonna click on this question box so I can incorporate people's questions, put them in the Q&A box. Don't use any big words because I don't know how to read. Okay. Oh, okay. So Lupe wants to know, I would love to know more about the decision to include photographs, and from Sam, what that added to you as a reader. Okay, I'm gonna get my answer out of the way quickly and say that it added a lot. I think it was like a surprise, you know, when Mike sent the first like selfie or whatever, and I was like, oh, okay, this has pictures. I thought it was very cool. Okay, now talk about the reason to include them.
I think that because I have that reaction whenever literary fiction has pictures, like I'm just like, oh shit, like they put a picture in here. That's strange. And then
Mm-hmm.
see it again and then again and then again. So really wanting to have that visceral reaction that, you know, you sort of just have it once and then it goes away, but you did have it. But also like in a novel that is characterized in a lot of ways by the sort of silences between characters, texting and sending one another photos and cooking for one another seem like a way to sort of fill those gaps, you know, like another means of communicating, another way of imparting comfort, another way of getting closer to the thing they actually want to say, you know? So if Mike is feeling a kind of way and perhaps he isn't able to articulate it the way that he wants to, he'll send a photo, right? And Ben will do the same. Or maybe Mike will cook something very quick for Ben, even if he's very tired, right? And he doesn't want to have like a certain argument, right? Or Mitsuko, who ends up staying with the maybe partner of her son, who's gone to go see his estranged father on no notice whatsoever and is left her with a stranger. The first thing she does is cook Benson a meal to bring them to a place of comfort and sort of on an even keel. And trying to put what effect that action had or the effects that any of those actions had in dialogue or even exposition would have been quite clunky. So trying to figure out ways to do that so that you do get that visceral, like, oh, there's like a photo in here. Like, let me look at the photo and think about what it's there for, and then incorporate that into my reading effect for the things that do actually appear on the page was something that was really important to me. And I was really fortunate in that I pitched the idea to my editor and she did not dunk on me. And we pitched it to the design team and they did not dunk on us. And the question became like, how do we make this happen more so than, you know, this stupid fucking idea. So it started with 300 pictures or so. And then I windowed it down to about 200. Then I windowed that down to about 100 and then to the 11 or so that actually populate the book. And the criteria for it in a lot of ways was geography, because Ben and Mike are in two different places, so that made itself fairly obvious, but also the feeling that they maybe wanted to impart to the person that they were sending the photo to, right? And what you may have wanted like your partner or your significant other or your maybe partner to see when they weren't there with you, right? Like really trying to think through that, whether it was a picture that was actually incorporated or whether it was like a picture that was said to have been sent and just sort of described, was pretty tricky, but it was a fun problem to have.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. It's also so cool what you said about showing rather than telling, especially with the food, because there was definitely a moment when I was like, why is Ben even still with this guy? And then I got to the point where you talked about how Mike made pancakes when he got up, and then when Ben eventually got up hours later, Mike would make pancakes for him, and I'm like, well, I'd stay for that. So no, so yeah, it was perfect. Okay, Emmy Lou wants to know, your first published work was a series of short stories. Did you feel that writing a novel was the next evolution, or was that always the goal? Was your writing process much different than with Lot?
Thanks so much for asking that question. Didn't feel like an evolution to me. Like I would have been quite content just writing short stories and didn't really feel like the goal either, because Memorial was actually like a short story to begin with. It was quite a short story. It was less than 3,000 words. And I was in the middle of writing another project that was just ghastly and will never be finished. And in the midst of that, I was thinking, it was just terrible, just like absolute folly. Like, but in the middle of that, I would constantly think about the characters in that very short story and the sort of thematic concerns that they had. And for me, as far as process is concerned, I really like working with themes and with questions that I know I won't be able to answer, you know, or I know that that lack of an answer will lead to more questions. And perhaps the momentum of that questions will be such that I can create a narrative out of it and come up with another way of thinking about it or another way of extending that conversation. So if something seems as if though it'll hold my interest in a lot of ways because like it takes a fucking long time to write something, then that's what I'll usually err towards sticking with. But as far as like process is concerned, my brain just sort of shuts down after 1,200 words. So all of the short stories in Lot, like there is not really a section longer than 1,200 words. Like there's one story where that's the case, and that story took like a year and a half to write, so I don't do it very often. So for Memorial, it's very seldom that the actual scenes themselves are quite long. So the writing process was very much the same, but I think a key difference between Memorial and Lot is that a lot of the questions that I had for Lot held my interest for the length of a short story, like that sort of 2,500 to 5,500 word pocket. Whereas for Memorial, I had to finish it in order to see where the characters would end up. Like I didn't know that. Like at the outset, I knew that Ben and Mike and Mitsuko would be the sort of triad at the heart of the novel. And I knew that the novel would oscillate between Ben's vantage point and Mike's vantage point. And I knew the emotional pocket and the sort of tonal pocket that I wanted to end up in. But I had no idea what that would actually look like in practice or in scene. So I had to finish the book and know more about the characters and sort of learn who they were in order to get to that point.
There's a question from Francine that asks about the process of moving it from the short story heirlooms that was mainly Ben to the full-fledged novel Memorial.
That's a really good question. I don't really have a sexy answer. The novel had already been written at that point, so the excerpt heirlooms was an excerpt, like we pulled it out of Memorial. But maybe an interesting process question was that problem became how do we pull an excerpt from this already completed work that sort of gets at the tonal pocket and the emotional pocket and some of the central concerns of the novel so that someone would read the excerpt and then maybe want to give the novel a go. And that was largely just the genius of my editor for Memorial, Laura, and my editor that I worked with over at the New Yorker, Willing. So all three of us together, we were able to put together like a snapshot of what we hoped the novel would ultimately encompass.
It's so nice to have an editor who you like, or two editors who you like, who can like pull back and tell you what you need to do and help see things and help you shape things into what they end up being. I was talking to my editor the other night and I was just like, it truly is a collaborative effort. I mean, I do most of the work, but I will give her credit. It is nice to have someone you trust who's like, well, let's fix this, or what if we go in this direction, or what if we go in that direction. So
it's super important. Like a thing about Memorial, like my editor Laura, like the last word of the book is hers, you know, like we wrote the final scene and we like sort of went back and forth about like what it ultimately meant and the sort of context around it. And then she was like, okay, and this isn't a spoiler, what if we just like change the last word to home? And that completely recontextualized the entirety of the novel, and it made a sort of sense that it hadn't prior to that. So just being really lucky to work with really thoughtful folks and really generous folks is always like a gift.
It's cool. I mean, my editor like picks my titles. Like they really are.
They're so good though.
all in there. I don't title any of my collections. We work on it and then she gives me a list and then I'm like, well, pick what you want. And then that's what we go with.
They're so good.
Yeah, it's that relationship is nice. It's nice to like feel like you're working in tandem rather than like spinning out on your own. Okay, Brooke wants to know, minus being from Houston, why did you want to write about Houston? I haven't found many books that are based in Houston.
Oh, thank you. I haven't either. So that's a large part of the reason why I like to write about Houston. It is a bit strange now because I've been able to monetize it, and that's like always kind of a weird thing. But I actually do like Houston. Like I still live here. Like I go to the same places. So like I write about it because I actually like it, because I don't see it very often. But also because like I'm starting to. I think it's like kind of an asshole thing to be like, these are the things that I write about. But it looks like the things that I write about are community and found families, and that's so prevalent in the city because it's such, it's one of the most diverse cities in the country, and it's so defined by that diversity in the midst of all of the sprawl that we have. And despite the fact that it's actually quite an ugly city, sometimes you just sort of have like these strip malls and the strip malls and then like a highway and then just like a former rice field that's now like a strip mall and then a movie theater and then
I love
just
a
like a
strip
bayou.
mall. I love a strip mall.
They're ugly, but I don't mind them. Like I spend well, not anymore. I spend time in my living room and the room
And I
across the
like
hall. But
to park and walk in and then walk out, and my car is right there.
really, that's
I'm a convert. I mean, maybe because I moved to a strip mall place, but
oh.
I love to see my car from the restaurant.
Yeah, like I mean, but so much of Houston life is like characterized by strip malls. The thing about strip malls is that you'll have, a Korean restaurant right next to a Iranian restaurant, right next to a Tex-Mex joint, right next to like
Yeah.
a bail bonds joint, right next to like a Catholic school, right? And they're, because we don't have zoning and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But everyone seems to find a way to make that work. And that, like how do they make it work? Like there's no clear answer to that. Like I'm sure there's like a fiscal answer to it and there is probably an infrastructural answer to it. But as far as a thematic or an emotional answer, like that's not going to be as clean cut. So I think that that's where a lot of story is.
Albert wants to know, what was it like going through the A24 deal? Okay. And who'd be your actors for the leads?
It was an interesting process. Like you're literally the first person who's asked that, like at all for so thank you. It took a bit. I was really lucky in that my media film agent, Alice Lawson, guided me along because I would have been absolutely lost without her. We talked to about, I don't want to get the number wrong actually, but it was more than 10 and it was less than 13 different entities that were interested
Oh
in
my God.
Memorial, the project. And everyone was really lovely and thoughtful and really gracious with their time. And I feel really lucky to be working with A24 and the Rudum team because I think that our shared vision for it is that we just want to make something really cool that we ourselves would want to watch, which feels like a really palpable thing. So it's been really exciting. Yeah, it's been like really lovely so far.
Who are your dream leads?
I think that I don't know, like a thing about Memorial is that like I use, maybe you do this as well, Samantha, but like when I'm writing, sometimes I'll have like a trope of like an actor in
Mm-hmm.
mind, or even if I'm reading, like if I'm reading fiction, like I'll have like a trope of an actor in mind or like the sort
Yep.
of person that embodies this. And for Memorial, I didn't really have anyone that immediately came to mind for, most any of the roles. And that was really exciting to me. And it is really exciting to me. And that was a crucial part of the auction process beyond my wanting to write it, is that I wanted to work with folks that would cast like a wide net
Yeah.
and to cast it far and would cast people on the basis of them being able to play the role in lieu of having to shoehorn like a capital N name person in order to get like the thing made. You know, that was really, really important to me. Of the people that we talked to, three entities out of the between 10 and 13, only three asked about the size of the characters and whether the physical appearance of the characters mattered, like only three. So that was how that conversation usually went. But it was something that was important to me and it was a sticking point.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Okay, I think we're supposed to wrap up soon, so maybe this will be our last one. I don't know. Someone's
Okay.
telling me if I'm getting this wrong. Okay. What are both of you currently reading? I'll start because mine's short. I'm reading this book called Tiny Nightmares, which is a collection of like flash fiction horror stories.
Yeah.
What are you reading?
So I'm actually rereading. Wow, no, thank you. So if you haven't
Stop
read
that.
that book, it's a book that you should buy and you should read. It's so good. Such a great
Okay,
book.
but also like you should get this book
Yes. Oh,
and
I
then
guess. Yeah.
book.
I'm also reading Nights When Nothing Happened by Simon Hahn. It's a book that comes out in a few weeks. It's so great. It's just like the loveliest book. And then I was reading Pieces by Helena Yemi, which is such a great book, and I'm excited for everyone to read it so we can talk about it. And I'm also reading Bestiary, and I'm also rereading Tokyo Ueno Station by Yu Miri, which is just the loveliest book, and it really stuck.